he's got to finish that level of Angry Birds.
It feels like that, it does.
Is that Angry Birds real?
This thing, the marketing on this thing is great. Oh, you just clipped the audio. Alright, we're good.
Sorry. I have a cackle.
Good evening. My name is Eric, the IT guy. Where's the edge of the projector so I know I don't walk through it? Right there. Okay. My name is Eric, the IT guy. Can everyone hear me in the back? I can talk louder. And I'm a solutions architect for a company called Gitlab. So if you haven't heard of us, Gitlab is a single application for your entire DevOps lifecycle. Unless you're a cerner, there's a lot of interest. Sorry, inside joke. There's great opportunity for Gitlab to come in and instead of managing all these disparate tool chains, to actually have one single application to handle the entire pipeline. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit. So I gave a talk that somewhat resembles this one in DevOps Days Des Moines. Don't talk to a room of developers right after lunch about open communications. You'll put the audience to sleep. So that's the lesson I learned there. But yeah, I gutted this talk and I didn't leave my room for 3 days. It was rough. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, who am I? As I said, I'm the IT guy. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and everywhere else. I do some guest hosting on a few podcasts. The Ask No Show. That's about the only active one right now. I'm also in conjunction with my work with DevOps and GitLab. I'm also an open source advocate. I've worked with the GNOME Foundation. I've worked with open source media like the Ask Noah Show and Jupiter Broadcasting. What else have I done? I did some work with PeerTube, which is kind of an open source federated self-hosted YouTube. We can play buzzword bingo later. So anyway, tonight, actually, I want to kind of set on the edge of that right now between GitLab and myself. So I was more than excited to accept the request to come and talk tonight because this group and GitLab and the IT guy all have a very big meaning for me. I'll also plug DevOps Days Kansas City because you never know the people you're going to meet. From my own experience, I went last year. Last year was my first time at a DevOps conference, and I ran into a salesman for GitLab. We talked for 10 minutes. His words to me was, we need someone with your energy. You don't get an option. Go home tonight and put in an application. We want you here at GitLab. And, well, they've got me branded and everything, so here I am. So go, enjoy the talks, learn a little bit, but more than anything, definitely talk to other people. They call it the hallway track. You know, you've got the talk tracks, but you've also got the hallway track. There's vendors, there's recruiters, there's people you just bump into in the hallway, and you say, "Hey, I like your shirt. Do you work there, or are you just a fan?" And you strike up a conversation. So, from my own experience, I spent 10 years as a systems engineer. A lot of that was on the Linux side of the house. I gave up Windows years ago. It was a bad habit. I kicked it. I'm on Linux now. But I was a systems engineer for a long time, and I cannot express how frustrating it was. As operations in a DevOps world, things move too slow. I was doing way too much manually. Automation is kind of where things are going, but some of the companies I worked for didn't necessarily see it the same way. So I spent a lot of time building the same servers over and over again. I spent a lot of time fixing the same issues over and over again. And it usually was always on a Saturday night at 2 a.m. I mean, how many of us carry that? Well, it's not a pager anymore, but it's who gets those text messages and those phone calls? And whether people care about it or not, we're the ones who end up having to fix it. And that's kind of what I expressed to a future teammate at GitLab, was that I was tired of getting those phone calls. With tools like Ansible, SaltStack, GitLab, with tools like this, we don't have to work like that anymore. And that's kind of where GitLab got its start. So what is GitLab? As I said, GitLab is a single application for the entire software development lifecycle. So if I pick on your tool chain, I'm sorry, but no, I'm not. So a lot of you probably have this problem. Tell me if this sounds like any of you. I host my repository on github.com. I use Jenkins, which is a nightmare to run because it's resource hungry and the plugins always break. I use Confluence to track my knowledge base. I use SonarQube to run scans. Who haven't I picked on? Anyway, if you think about it, you could be talking about 2 or 3 dozen servers to manage 6 or 8 different applications. And every time you go to update one of them, you have to pray to the production gods that everything works out, that the integrations are still there when you're done. And you know what else is a problem? Everybody talks about tool chains and the difficulty of moving between tools. But there's something else that people don't always think about. It's called context switching. Context switching is the process your brain has to go through when you switch from one task to another. You switch from one interface to another, you switch from one side of your brain to the other, you go through context switching. And what that does is that resets your mind. Multitasking is a myth. So if any of your managers or people you're interviewing with ask you if you can multitask, say, no, I'm good at DevOps though, because you're here. But context switching, studies have shown, can take 23 minutes to reestablish your full capability, your full productivity. So every time you go from looking at your issue queue to your repository, it could take you 23 minutes to really get into the groove of what you're trying to do. So if you're going from trying to make a minor code change to then running a security scan on it, how many times to fix one issue? If you're lucky enough to be in an agile environment, how many times are you going to context switch with all those tools? That's where GitLab tries to help fix the issue. It's one interface, it's one process, it's one application, it's one set of servers. So when we talk about the entire DevOps lifecycle, we're talking issues, we're talking project management, we're talking source control, we're talking CI/CD, we're talking about Kubernetes integration if you're in the container world. We're talking about security scanning, systems monitoring. And then by the end of the year, we're also going to add in another phase of the life cycle called defend. And so we're going to try and help protect your application while it's live in production. And so, fun fact, that's not a fox. It's a tanuki. What is a tanuki? Is a Japanese raccoon dog. In Japan, these raccoon dogs are known for being very smart creatures and work very well in groups. And that's what GitLab and that's what DevOps is all about. When you're working in a DevOps culture, it's not about using all the new fancy buzzwords. It's not about sitting around a fire and singing Kumbaya like some kind of hippie movement. DevOps is a way of thinking. It's a way of doing work. When we talk about DevOps, we're talking about bringing everyone to the table at the same time. We're talking about bringing the developers, the project managers, the operations folks, and yes, even the security team. Everyone should be sitting at the table when we start talking about what a particular feature, what a particular project requires. How many of us have wasted months of our time sitting through project meetings trying to plan out exactly every single step that a particular task will require and exactly how long it's going to be required. And then you start out behind. You already start out over budget, and go figure. Technology is difficult. It is a creative endeavor. Don't let anyone tell you differently. Technology is creative and it's difficult. So you can't tell me that you can sit in a room for 2 months and plan out the entire migration of a production application. It just doesn't work that way. So if you move to a DevOps type philosophy, you don't have that problem because you're tackling one issue at a time and you see it all the way through to production. That was kind of a stretch from the raccoon dog to DevOps, but go with me for a minute. So the GitLab way when it comes to DevOps, our mission is to change all creative work from read-only to read-write. When everyone can contribute, consumers become contributors, and we greatly increase the rate of human progress. The ideals that GitLab supports are transparency, our contributions, our iteration. The things that GitLab stands for don't just apply in the technology space. We want to be able to involve everyone in the process. That's why GitLab is an open core application. What does that mean? That means that about 90% or so of our code is open source. Our handbook is open source. Our documentation is open source. You can actually go out to our website, gitlab.com, and you can read the entirety of our handbook. There's nothing hidden, there's no password wall, nothing. You can see our entire handbook. You can see all of our documentation for our product. The other 10% are part of our paid features. Why is that? Well, because the people that are actually developing the application kind of have to eat. Food seems to be important, so So GitLab, the company. As I mentioned, GitLab is open core. There are the paid side of the house is our enterprise level features and our support. So the higher tier you go, there's 4 tiers. There's free all the way up to ultimate. So for each tier, you get a higher SLA for your support team. In fact, in the higher tiers, you actually get assigned a technical account manager, a TAM. So there's a few things that make GitLab truly unique. As of today, there are over 700 people in GitLab. When I started, it was like 240, and I started in the end of December, early January. So GitLab is growing very, very quickly. So we're talking about 700 people. Where do you house that many people? Well, that's one of the cool things about GitLab. GitLab is one of the first all remote companies. GitLab doesn't have a headquarters. GitLab doesn't have an office anywhere. We're located in over 56 countries. That number may be even out of date with the recent hires. And not only are we all remote, but we are all remote from the start. The first 2 people that worked for GitLab were in 2 different countries inside Asia. And fun fact, if you follow the stock market, GitLab is going to IPO in November of 2020, because at GitLab, we're not just focused on the present. GitLab releases every month on the 22nd, no fail. In fact, we've done so for almost 90 months consecutively. So it's important at GitLab, when you're moving that quickly, to have a good solid roadmap. So we've been planning, we've been growing, we've been building from a very small company up to a scale that can handle the enterprise. So GitLab has one product, and one product only. GitLab's products is GitLab. We have over 100,000 customers. Sorry, I'm checking my notes because I have a horrible brain for numbers. And last I checked, we have over 2,200 people who have contributed code, handbook revisions, comments on our documentation. 2,200 people. So it's not as big of a number as it used to be. But think, when I started, GitLab was just around 300 people. And we had 2,200 people that did not get a paycheck from GitLab that were making contributions to our product. GitLab was started in 2011 and programmed in Ruby on Rails, and I think some of the newer microservices are actually built in Go. So the GitLab way, we share everything. Our handbook, our documentation, our company culture even. Talks like this are becoming more and more prevalent. We actually had a team member about 2 or 3 months ago actually leave GitLab to start a consulting company about how to work in an all remote environment. GitLab values credit, and that's not an acronym, but it's an abbreviation for our core values. It's collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, iteration, and transparency. And GitLab, having worked at a few different companies as an FTE or as a contractor or as a consultant, a lot of companies just put something down on paper just to say, here's our values, and then they throw it aside. It's something nice they can throw up on their website. GitLab is one of the few companies that I've been around that actually lives it on a day-to-day basis. Collaboration. Everything is public, so everyone can contribute, everyone can comment, anyone can go out there, create a merge request, suggest a change, and it'll get consideration. Results. We're results driven. For the first time in my life, I don't have to keep a timesheet. GitLab's more interested in what I put out than the amount of effort I put in. Some weeks that means I work more, other weeks like this week while I'm moving, not so much. But as long as I can get the job done, GitLab isn't as worried about how I get that job done. Efficiency, that kind of ties into results. If I can be efficient with my time and spend that time connecting with my customers, I guess I should pause for a second. As a solutions architect, I'm kind of the technical arm of the sales team. So if someone has an interest in GitLab, I'll jump on a discovery call with that customer and with their dedicated salesman. And we'll talk about what their pain points are. We'll talk about how much they hate how resource hungry Jenkins is, or how many times the plugins have broken and their production environment's been down for hours. We talk about those pain points. We don't talk about product. We don't talk about features. We talk about what are your pain points and how can we help make those better. Because a company that has a good work-life balance is going to be more productive. There isn't a number you can throw at it. There isn't some algorithm you can follow. If your engineers are constantly on call on the weekends, if they're constantly getting woken up in the middle of the night for the same problems over and over and over again, you're going to lead to burnout. And that's a serious issue in today's culture, especially in this industry. So if you're more focused on streamlining and automating and making your environment more resilient, that way when your engineers go home, they're even less likely to get paged out. They're going to be more productive. And that's one place where GitLab can add some value that you can't track on paper. And that's driven by our value of efficiency. Diversity. As I mentioned, we have almost 60 different countries represented within our company. We have over 700 employees from all different walks of life, from all different fields and industries. I was a systems engineer. I'm one of the few that actually works on the solutions architect team. But we've had former finance advisors, we've got prior technical trainers, we've got all kinds of different people not only fulfilling their role, but contributing all across the country. Iteration. GitLab doesn't sit back and just wait for the right idea. We'll try something. If it doesn't work, we iterate on it, we change it, we make adjustments as we go. By releasing every month, that gives us an incredible amount of velocity to make a change and build upon that. And transparency. Everything's public. We don't hold anything back. Our roadmap is public. The fact that we want to IPO is public. What we plan to do, where we failed, where we've had outages, all that information is public. So how did GitLab get here? It takes practice. It's not something that can live inside the front cover of your handbook and you look at it once when you onboard and you never again. It has to be a lifestyle. It has to be something you practice every single day. It's got to be part of your company's culture. So GitLab is all remote. That makes that, you would think that would make our culture more difficult to maintain. In fact, it's quite the opposite. GitLab seems to attract a certain type of people that is able to thrive even though there's not a physical presence, a central place where we can all go and talk around the water cooler. And because we're all remote, our success depends on the availability of information. It's all cyclical. Because we're transparent, because we're diverse, because we iterate, all these things just around and around we go every release cycle to make GitLab a better product. So how do we do that? GitLab has a couple of Twitter accounts. The first is at GitLab. The other is at GitLab. I think it's _status. So you can track the status of GitLab.com. GitLab.com is our software as a service solution. So you can go out there, you can create an account, you can get started for free, and give GitLab a try. So the other alternative is you can actually download GitLab and install it on a virtual machine, Ubuntu, CentOS, and you can get started at home or at your office. You can install GitLab Community Edition. So we have Community Edition and Enterprise Edition. So Community, free, open source, download it, play with it, and love it. Emphasis on the love it part. So GitLab is very active on Twitter. Now the next part is something that I haven't seen other companies do, at least not to this scale. Every team has a meeting once every 6 weeks that's public. It's published on YouTube. So you can actually go out there and see what each individual team is working on. So you can go out to customer success and see how we're trying to better craft demos that help inform customers of the value that we can bring. You can go out to the product team, to the various phases of our product. You can watch the secure team. You can watch the UI team, and you can see their public meetings, and you can watch the recordings. That's something I haven't seen anywhere else. GitLab's also very active on their blog. We don't just talk about GitLab on the blog. We talk about DevOps. We talk about trends in our culture. We talk about the effects that, one of the articles I read recently was what the effects on the industry, not on GitLab, but on the industry of some of the recent acquisitions within the DevOps space. regular communication is key. So every month, you can go out and on our blog, you can see our release notes. You can see all the features. You can see the bugs that have been fixed. You can see what functionality is being retired. And as I mentioned, you can go out and see that we've got Gitlab and Gitlab Unfiltered on YouTube, and all those videos are public. You can watch them. You can comment on them, and I highly encourage you to do so. So I've hinted at our company handbook. It's all public. I don't recommend reading it page for page because it's over 2,000 pages and continuing to grow. But within our handbook, there's quarterly OKRs. Basically, an OKR is an objective. It's something that you define an objective as a sentence, and you make sure that the key result is a measurable outcome. So you don't just say, I want to improve performance on X. You talk about improving performance on X by 20% by addressing some feature. So all that is public knowledge on our handbook. As I mentioned, our roadmap is public. So on May 25th, version 11.11 of our software was published. And here in just a few days, GitLab 12.0 is going to be out there. And that'll be available on our public releases, or on our public-facing releases page. So not only is the handbook and the documentation public, the actual code that the community edition is built on is public. You can go out there and you can make pull requests. You can see how GitLab works under the hood. You can see how protocols like Git and MariaDB and Unicorn, you can see how all these services interact because our code is public. GitLab also is built on GitLab. So all of our feature requests, all of our bugs, all of our security vulnerabilities are published on GitLab as a project. So this project right here, this is for GitLab.com. And yeah, I should have added more to that screenshot. But you can actually go in, pull down GitLab and see the most current production release. You can even go in, create an issue or a merge request. You can request new features. You can give a thumbs up to existing features, and GitLab doesn't just ignore those requests. By the time a new feature gets 100, by the time it gets 100 thumbs up, it's actually going to start getting the attention of our product team. And I have seen time and time again, when enough people are interested in a feature, we'll actually rearrange our roadmap to accommodate for that feature, because it's something our customers and our community need. Slides out of sequence, sorry. So, not only is the handbook public, but you can also go in and see how GitLab does expense reports. So anytime I take a trip, you can actually go out there and see what that process is. You can see a more practical page might be, how do you engage sales? Your company is interested in the product. How do I engage sales? You just go out there, sales engagement is one of the pages. Just follow the process. There's an email address and some basic information that we request, and we'll get you in touch. So a lot of people ask us how we overcome the challenges of all remote. I wouldn't think it would. I wouldn't call it a challenge. So no person is an island. We've heard that cliche for a long time, but interaction is key. Not only do we have, not only do we cycle through each of our teams on a 6-week cycle so that everyone can see what everyone else in the company is working on, but we have daily company calls Monday through Thursday, and that's where the entire company jumps on a Zoom chat. It's my hands up to Zoom, because it's incredible when you get 200 people on a call. Somehow it works, but. Those daily calls, we go through announcements, we congratulate people that get discretionary bonuses, we talk about new hires, we talk about upcoming events. There's even been a segment lately on the NHL finals. But those daily company meetings are followed up by group calls. Group calls are random divisions of the company of about 30 people each. So every 6 weeks, we rotate to a new call group. And that gives us a chance to meet people almost at random. And with 700 people in the company, it's hard to get to know everybody. It's hard to know who else is in your company, who else has common interests. To make those connections, we have group calls. And so whatever time is remaining from the company call, we spend in group calls. And there's usually a daily starter question. You know, it's usually what's your favorite food or what's the weirdest drink you've ever tried. But it gives us a way to start making connections. In fact, a couple of the people from my original call group and I still keep in touch because we found we had those common interests. It's kind of our equivalent. It's kind of the online digital version of the water cooler. And then a few weeks ago, I was actually in New Orleans for 7 days for Gitlab Contribute. Contribute is our it's not annual. Gitlab Contribute happens every 9 months, and it's for the entire company to go somewhere, whether it's Greece, whether it's New Orleans, whether it's somewhere in the UK, and the entire company gets together. We have a conference, we do excursions, we have meals together, and we get to meet all these people in person. It was a lot of fun, especially because I got to meet some of the team members that I work with on a daily basis and actually see that there's actually more of a body than just shoulders and head. I got to meet people from my call groups, and then I got to meet a whole bunch of people that I hadn't met before, from all different departments, different walks of life, different religions, different backgrounds, all kinds of. You got to interact with a whole bunch of different people. One of the other ways that GitLab utilizes the all-remote functionality of our company is we use asynchronous communication, and that means that if you send a Slack message, you don't expect an immediate response. You sent the message, it's there, it's waiting. Sometimes that's difficult if you're on one side of the globe and the person you're talking to is on the other side. But it means that each of us is free to accomplish the tasks that we need to accomplish without the expectation of an immediate response of, while that may sound frustrating, it's actually really, really freeing. Because if I'm in the middle of building a demo for a customer call I have the next day and I get a Slack message, I'm not expected to stop what I'm doing, give into that context switching, deal with a message, and then try and go back to what I was working on. That could be 46, 47 minutes of lost productivity, but instead we're given the freedom to actually go in, do what we need to do, and respond to communication as necessary. In fact, some of our teams recently have even added their team calls to a podcast feed. So now I can go out there, subscribe to their RSS feed, and I can get their company call on my podcast on my podcast reader, just like I do the podcast I follow every week. The hours are flexible. We don't have a central office. We don't have a central time zone, and there's a couple of us that are remote. Because we're global, it's not uncommon for me to go work in the late morning, work in the early afternoon, take some time off to spend some time with my kids, and then after they go to bed around 8 or 9, I can jump back on, finish up a few things. I can brush up on a piece of technology that I'm going to be addressing the next day. I have that flexibility, and my company puts their faith in me to get the job done so that I can actually have that balance to spend time with my kids, to take downtime if I need to. So what are some of the benefits of being all remote? Company costs are lower. We don't have a central headquarters to maintain. There's not this huge, vast campus of buildings and lawn care and security and data centers. We don't have all that. So GitLab actually has one of the most unbelievable expense reimbursement policies I've ever seen. When I started, I was allowed a sit-stand desk, a new chair, some new monitors. It was really amazing to be able to use that. But in the end, GitLab wins, and so do I. I get new equipment, but because they provided my workspace, they're not having to provide a corporate headquarters. One of the other advantages to being all remote is we can hire anywhere. There is an ever-growing list of countries that we can hire from, whether it's full-time or whether it's contract, and we can pull from a larger pool of people. If you have an internet connection and you're not within one of the 5 or 6 countries that are not currently legally set up to work with GitLab, then we can pull from there. Imagine if we had a corporate headquarters and it was somewhere like Kansas City. We've got an incredible pool of talent here. But if you're talking about building an entire company like GitLab, like GitLab's planning to be, that pool gets a lot thinner. So, one of the things we love to do is, GitLab is big on dog fooding. GitLab is built on GitLab. We practice asynchronization. We practice on our values on a daily basis. So this presentation was kind of built on the same. I'm an open source advocate, so I use Linux and open source tools to talk to you all tonight. So here's my goal. I threw a lot of information, talked a lot about GitLab. And if you don't work there, you don't have any desire to work there, none of this really may matter. But here's what I want you to take away from this. GitLab is not just another product. It's not just another company. It is a unique way of approaching work. And a lot of these principles, a lot of these values are something you can take back to your own companies and say, look, GitLab is doing this, and they're incredibly successful with what they're doing. Give me the flexibility. Let me try this. Don't require me to track my hours. Let me respond to messages asynchronously. Let me iterate. Let me work on my tasks in a way that helps me be the best father, the best husband or wife, the best I guess the best parent. Sorry, the best parent, the best spouse or partner, the best version of myself. Since working at GitLab, I've actually been making it to the gym more often. I've actually lost weight. My financial goals are being met. I'm sleeping well at night. I spent more time with my kids in the last few months than I have in previous jobs. GitLab gives me that ability, and that's something that we aren't going to keep to ourselves. None of this is secret. You can go find our values, our handbook, our processes out on our website. Take that back to your companies and help change the culture of IT. Help reduce burnout. Help improve families. Because when you reach burnout, when you ignore company values and company culture starts to fade away, divorce rates go up, financial stress goes up, general stress goes up, health goes down. By finding a good work-life balance, by finding a good company culture, you can work through all that. So because of that, I've open sourced my talk. If you go out to my repos on GitLab.com, you can actually download this talk, get back to it, make suggestions, add in maybe something I didn't brush on, or take it back to your own company and go, look, there's another company out there doing all this stuff, and look at how excited their guy is, and he won't stop talking. So, like I said, by being a part of a community like this, you're already on the right path. Because for me, I went from being a burned out, frustrated systems engineer in a position where I was going to go nowhere, to finding a company with culture that I could understand, that I could thrive in, that I could enjoy. And I take more joy in what I do now than I have in a long time. And that has had so many just compounding benefits for myself. And so I was more than happy to come out here and share all that with each of you. And I hope that in all of this, there is some little nugget each of you can take back to your companies and improve, even just in the slightest, the way you all work. And I was asked to let you all know, GitLab is hiring. We've grown by quite a bit, but we still have a lot of growing to do. There's 3 people on my team. It's going to be 6 by the end of the year, and the rest of the company is experiencing similar growth. So if you're interested in GitLab and culture, in a position, I'm more than happy to talk to you one-on-one afterwards. But in the meantime, anybody have any questions or feedback? Yes, sir.
What was the hardest part of the culture transition? What was the hardest part? You talked a lot about the positives. What was the hardest part about transitioning to GitLab culture?
Great question. So for me, the question was how. What was the hardest part of adapting to GitLab's culture? The biggest problem for me the hardest part for me getting used to GitLab's culture was figuring out that GitLab actually practiced its culture. So many places I've gone say we value this or we value that, and you don't really see it in your day-to-day operations. In fact, quick anecdote, when I was onboarding, you know, you're always told not to take time off within the first couple of months, you know, supposedly it looks bad. So my third week at GitLab, the apartment I was in at the time found mold in the bathroom. My landlord refused to do anything about it, couldn't get anyone in there to fix it. They wouldn't take responsibility for it. And then because of that, and because I was breaking out and getting sick, and I actually had to move. I broke my lease, I sacrificed my deposit, and I moved to a different apartment. I was terrified because so many cultures I've been in, chances are I might have been let go, or it would have severely crippled my ability to become an active member of that company on time. GitLab worked with me. They extended my onboarding another week. I said, look, I'm going to take 2 days off. I'm going to find a place. I'm going to move. I'll be back. When it took 4 days, my boss was like, yeah, I knew there was no way you could do that in 2. It's not a problem. And it was just letting my own guard down. It was just allowing myself to be a part of that culture. It was my own preconceptions that prevented me from really transitioning. It's amazing to find a company that values its culture so much. Other questions?
So I know you mentioned that your like expense reporting process is public. Is that like, are your expenses actually published in a place that I can go look at them? Or not quite like that. What is the process?
The process is public. So the question was, with everything at GitLab being public, can you go out and see what my expenses are? We won't talk about my expenses. I've literally been coast to coast in the last 2 months. So the process is public, but there are just a few things that are not public at GitLab. But the reasoning behind those things not being public are specific financials. Like, you can't go and look up my expense reports. If there's been, if people ops is involved, basically the HR department. If the HR department is asked to get involved with a teammate who isn't adapting to the culture very well, and their productivity is dropping, and kind of have to bring in some extra people, those issues are confidential between the team member in question, their manager, and the people ops team. So very, very limited for obvious reasons, because you don't want to go out and expose that person to further ridicule, to further pressure. So there's certain things that are confidential at GitLab, but we cite those in the handbook and explain why. And when you take a step back and think about it, you can kind of see why. Because if I go through a rough patch and I'm seeking work-related counseling and my performance has dropped and I'm basically on kind of a work-related probation, I don't necessarily want anyone out there to know that. So there's certain things, certain privacy-related matters that are kept confidential. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah. For your salary, is it do they usually base the salary based off where you live? Like, is there like some kind of an adjustment?
That is a great question. Wow. that is probably the best question I've had about GitLab. So the question was, how is salary calculated? Is there adjustment based on where you live? Absolutely. There's a number of factors, and again, these are all public. There's a number of factors that are taken into account. Location, the type of area you live in. So if you live out in the middle of nowhere and economies are smaller and that kind of thing, I don't fully understand all the math and algorithms and black magic that PeopleOps uses to calculate that, but my salary would be different in the Bay Area than it is here. Cost of living is another factor. My own experience, the type of position I'm in, because not only am I salary, but I also get a commission based off of deals that I work with sales. my performance isn't quota driven like sales, but I do get a commission off of that. So great question. I don't feel like I fully answered that, but it does vary based on where you live and what your role is and your experience and so forth. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I want to expand on that a little bit. As the remote culture you embrace, you mentioned that you're moving again soon. Are you moving to another
Yes.
city? Will
No.
you enter a new cost of living if you change jobs while you change locations while you're still employed?
That's a great question. So the question was, because I just talked about moving again. This is the second time since I started at Gitlab. So the question was, if I change cities, how does that process work? So I'm moving from Crossroads to River Market, so there isn't really anything that Gitlab needs to get involved with. But if I were to move from, say, Kansas City to, I'll pick on the Bay Area again, if I were to move from Kansas City to San Francisco, then there's an approval process. It's more of an evaluation process through people ops of what is that going to do to your salary, and there is a process in place to evaluate that. And actually, a friend of mine was just talking about moving from Vegas to, I think, Oklahoma. So there was some, not concerns, but there's a moment of pause to kind of evaluate what that would do to his salary, to his commission, based on cost of living, based on location, because some of our teams are region-based, so we do have like an East team and a West team and that kind of thing. But so it really depends on your job function. But yes, there would be a process where GitLab would. I can't imagine GitLab saying no, you can't move there. Like, hey, I want to move to Boston because I have a third cousin or something that lives there. I can't imagine GitLab saying no, but there would be a process to recalculate how that works. Great question. Yes, sir.
Company wanted to get started on GitLab. What would you say one of their strongest sections of the development process would be? Like, or do you recommend pulling out all these different vendors and putting everything in it all at once?
Great question. So the question was, if a company is moving to GitLab, what's kind of the best approach? My highly trained technical answer is, it depends. But I won't cop out with that. Let me explain kind of what I mean there. In some situations, if you're moving from a monolith architecture to containers or microservices, or even serverless functions, if you're moving from a monolith to a completely different architecture like that, sometimes it's best to just dive in full force. Just rebase your code repositories into GitLab and just start from the ground up. That's kind of my personal preference, just because GitLab is so different in the fact that it handles every phase of the pipeline. And one of the things I didn't talk about in the middle of the talk was that GitLab pipelines are actually built off of a YAML file. So you can go in and define every phase of the pipeline in YAML. And then that spins up a GitLab runner, which is basically a small Linux Docker container. So anything you can run on command line in a Linux box, you can put into our runners. Not to go too far down this rabbit trail, but I've talked to customers that actually use Terraform kicked off by a GitLab runner to spin up new EC2 instances on AWS, uses AWS APIs to set up a VPC, and then calls Ansible to configure those EC2 instances, and then actually deploys a Ruby application. So anything you can do inside a GitLab runner, or anything you can do on the Linux command line, you can do in a GitLab runner because of the power of the YAML configuration file. So because GitLab takes such a different approach, because it's all tied in, and it's all integrated, and it's all traceable, so if I create an issue and relate it to a merge request that's tied to a feature branch, I can track all of that through a merge request or through an issue. I can tie it all together. So, bring the rabbit trail back to the main trail. Because GitLab takes such a different approach, I've found customers that are moving from older architectures to something newer have better luck just dropping the code into a repository and fixing the deployment, then iterating. So once you get the deployment working, then you work on getting the security scans run. And by iterating through each phase of that pipeline, you can fairly quickly get a full pipeline from start to finish, ready to go. Now, if you're kind of straddling that gap, a lot of times it's easier to move one piece at a time. So usually the easiest thing to do, because it's the oldest part of GitLab, is the source code management, so the repositories, because it's just built off of Git. GitLab source code repository is just a UI front end for Git. So if I do a Git commit on the command line, I can do a Git commit within the UI. It's just a pretty front end. So a lot of times, if you've kind of started that transition, and then you're moving to GitLab, it's easier to start with, say, source code repositories, then move to pipelines, then add security scanning, and move things over a piece at a time. Just slowly take out your old legacy applications and replace it with GitLab. So it depends. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Does the GitLab, can you do configuration management also? Does it replace Puppet or Chef or any of those other parts, or do you still have to use it in conjunction with those tools?
So that's one of the things that we're trying to address this calendar year. Because right now I've seen a lot of companies starting to use tools like Puppet or Ansible as to store that code within within GitLab. That way, your Ansible playbooks are version controlled. You can pull them down to your local machine, make a change, and push them back up to the server. GitLab doesn't act as a puppet master. It doesn't serve as that right now. But rumor has it. There's nothing formal yet. But a little bird told me that Red Hat and GitLab are working close together to improve functionality, to provide more native functionality for Ansible in GitLab. So on top of the major phases, we also have things like built-in container registry, built-in Maven repositories. The self-hosted instances even have NFS shares available, or not NFS. Is it LVFS? I love the world of acronyms we live in. But there's a lot of functionality like that that's built in. Being an Ansible repository and being able to work on that more directly is in our roadmap. Like I said, there's nothing formal yet, so it's probably out there a little ways down the roadmap. But providing better infrastructure as code is definitely one of the things that we've seen we're lacking in, and we could somewhat easily start to bridge that gap a little bit. But right now, it's mostly just version control for your infrastructure as code, and then like we were talking about with pipelines, then calling Terraform or a Puppet or something from a runner, triggering that process. Great question. Any others?
I have one for you.
Yes, sir.
So, touching back on the open nature that GitLab, the business model that they employ, I kind of understand, within Git, you reprioritize your work based on the number of thumbs up, community feedback, things like that make sense. But I'm rather curious, you talk about how the handbook is all open source. A lot of the internal business processes are also all open source. Have they explained why? I mean, it's just kind of interesting business models. Is it just to try to push a cultural change in IT, or where does that stem from?
So, if I understand your question, is why open source all of our processes? Why open source our handbook? Not to be too sarcastic, but why not?
Fair enough.
But to your point, yes, GitLab has open sourced all of their processes because we've been open from the beginning. Everything we've done is public. Okay. So that's been ingrained in the culture from the very start. I mean, back in 2011, when it was just an open source project, because GitLab was an open source project for about 2 years before companies started to come around, and GitLab.com was actually the start of that company. GitLab was just something you'd install on your home cluster or on your production environment at your office, and you'd host it there. Sid, our CEO, actually came along and asked the original developer, hey, this is a great product, I love it, can I start GitLab.com to be basically shared hosting? So take away the need to manage the infrastructure. So GitLab.com was actually the original start of GitLab.
Okay.
So from that, the original developer and the guy who came on to be our CEO when the company actually formed, basically said, let's
try it this way.
They were from 2 different companies, 2 different cultures, so they kind of kept everything open just to enable them to work together.
Okay.
And then they added the 3rd and the 4th, and now there's over 700 people. So that just never changed. But to expand on your point, because GitLab has seen so much success, has brought so many improvements to our customers, the work-life balance, the quality of product, the speed of release, all those things, we've realized that, oh, these are keys to success. These are things that we found. This is a recipe that we found. It wouldn't be in the nature of open source to say, hey, open source community, thanks for our start, but no, we're keeping all of this to ourselves. So it ties into the DevOps culture and the open source culture, all those things that GitLab was founded on. It's staying true to that.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, so this is cool. I'm jumping from technical to operations to culture. It's a fun challenge.
With all those people joining Zoom calls at the same time, do you ever have issues with people like forgetting to mute?
That's where the moderator functionality comes in. Great.
Perfect.
Although funny anecdote about that. If you could turn off someone else's camera, that would be great. Because I'm sure there's been others, but the one that sticks out in my mind, I heard the story at Contribute in New Orleans a few weeks ago. One of the engineers has a cat, and they have an external USB webcam. So it's up higher and looks down, so better angle and better light and all that kind of thing. So this cat acts like a cat. If you're focused on something else, this cat wants your attention. If you're paying attention to the cat, it doesn't care. But if you're working on code or trying to talk on a Zoom call, this cat gets jealous. So on a couple of calls, all you see is the tip of this tail go across the bottom of the screen, and a few moments later goes back the other way. And finally someone goes, like mid-sentence, was on some point on their soapbox, was really making a point and driving it home, and just goes, what is that? It's my cat. So that in and of itself is kind of comical, but you kind of chuckle and move on. The same cat, a few weeks later, when their team call came up again, this cat decided that he was not getting enough attention. So he stood in the center of the keyboard, looking straight at his dad. So what are we looking at? All you see is his butt. So it's Zoom's great. There's a few things like that are interesting, but it's part of the culture. It's accepted. Like your kids come in and ask a question. A lot of us know each other's kids because they barge in the middle of the call and go, "Oh, hi, this is my son." But yeah, it's interesting sometimes. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, I hope this was beneficial. I hope you guys can take something back to the companies you're working for. If you're interested in GitLab the product or GitLab the company, I'm more than happy to continue talking about it. That's why GitLab likes me to do these things, because I don't shut up. But I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate what this group has done, not only for Kansas City, but also for me personally. So thank you guys very much.
So is there any interest in a product demo, or would anybody like to see GitLab? If folks are interested in sticking around to see GitLab, I think that would be cool, Eric, so that we can do a demo for Wi-Fi. It's good. But if you guys want to leave too, that's probably all right. So
I'll throw a Kit Kat back to your head if you leave.
Yeah, we got lots of games.
Cool.
How come no one's throwing Kit Kats at me?
Yeah, everybody's throwing Kit Kats there.
Thank you.
Cool, well, let's see what you got, Eric.
Alright, so for those that want to stick around,
Yeah, and if you guys are leaving, please take some food. We ended up with a lot of it.
I really hope that was successful.
Did you get any bites on the open source project you were looking to curate? I saw you tweeted something a couple, I can't remember how it was, maybe a week ago about trying to.
Yeah, I didn't get nothing. I got a couple of retweets and a couple of likes. It's like, okay, yeah, that doesn't help.
But no projects yet?
Nothing.
It'll come. I thought that was cool that you put that out there. Is that something that everybody gets to do, or do you just get a certain amount of credits that you can?
No, it's just something I want to do in my spare time. I'm, part of it being part of the open source community. The other part is I need to get deeper in this stuff than just the Hello World application I usually use for a product demo.
Yep, the demo stuff, I get it. Thanks for coming out, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I never realized GitLab was actually built up as a completely, basically open source company. It's very interesting model, actually.
Hey, like that?
Yeah, it's not something I've come across.
Well, that's why it's so surprising. It's the first time I've ever heard of anything quite like this.
I think Wall
Is that gonna
Street's
be-
going to be confused when you guys go out to jail.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah.
Matt, I cannot tell you how many times I go to a trade show or a conference or something and go, oh, GitLab, that's that engine that runs on top of GitHub, isn't it? No.
Just Git.
Oh, GitLab, it's that GitHub clone. It's like, no. Keep trying. Is that too small? I feel like that'd be too small for in the back.
So I was looking at
My binocular vision at home.
I was looking at some of your handles.
Yeah, dark mode. I got my.
How much do you like that laptop? I looked at one of those.
I love it.
No problems with it?
Is that the Galago Pro?
Yep.
If he doesn't give you an honest answer, I'll give you one because I personally own it. I was going to personally ask you why you're running Arch over Pop on it.
I like Arch.
No, it's a great one. It's awesome machine. It has every port that you need, which is nice. The others have said like, space bar? You don't hit it dead center? I don't type on my Gym Touch bar because I think it's a piece of crap. But yeah.
With the Galago?
No, on the, sorry, touch bar. I say in the space bar on the Galaga, like most people say you have to hit it pretty center. I've noticed that you just have to kind of be conscious.
You gotta have a better keyboard than the Mac.
It does feel good.
The keyboard's great. The one thing that I wish was better, but this isn't a fault of System 76, but as crappy as MacBooks have gotten, the one thing, okay, other than the monitor, other than the display, the one thing that Mac still nails every single time is the touchpad.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, that's a slightly hard shift, and then the battery life. Battery life is a little.
Yeah, battery life is a little tough, but I mean a lot of that is just the nature of Apple. They have the hardware, the firmware, the operating system, the application. Everything is finely tuned for what 5 or 6 variations of their base model.
Yep.
That's something that everyone else can't replicate.
Yeah, it is a solid machine. I
don't
actually have
curious, yeah, because I saw that on there. I was like, wait a second.
I
haven't
love
seen
my
one of those in a
Galago.
while.
In fact, it's really funny because GitLab does issue MacBooks,
Yeah.
but mine has 8 gigs of RAM. There's no way I'm doing a technical demo with like multiple tabs and all these applications, and Slack is just a resource hunting monster. So there's no way I'm doing all of that on my MacBook.
Well, it's only 8 gigs.
Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah, that'd be rough.
Well, they don't see solutions architect as an engineering role.
Yeah.
It's classified as like a sales role. So sales guys don't have 8 gigs of RAM. If you want me to do technical demos in an environment where I don't have an internet
Like
connection,
16.
about 18 or so. But I mean, it's It's got 32 gigs of RAM, terabyte SSD.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So I mean, I really decked it out. A lot of which because I wanted to be able, at some point, I'm going to use Vagrant and Ansible and tie all these tools together. I want to be able to run a single command and spin up a GitLab instance and a small Kubernetes cluster. So the demo that I'm about to do, I would like to be able to do on my laptop in case I'm in an environment where I don't have an internet connection. In fact, the demo I tried to do in Charlotte at Southeast Linux Fest this past weekend, couldn't get an internet connection. And I wasn't running any of this locally. I just needed enough bandwidth to get to GitLab.com and Google Cloud Platform. I just needed the two interfaces. There's no processing locally. It was so frustrating. But the hotel Wi-Fi was terrible.